a Baleful Strix build of Esper Stoneblade.
Before these guys get going, I did want to mention Uberlight Addison on Twitter asked about elf combo and whether we think the meta is good for elves. I think meta is always, well, almost always reasonable for elves. I think elves is a deck that attacks from kind of a strange angle where people don't typically come totally prepared for elves.
Yeah.
So I think elves is definitely a viable deck. And
Yeah.
almost.
I mean, I think elves is always good and never great.
That's a great way to put it. So a Thoughtseize from Brian on turn 1, and it looks like a Spell Pierce from Christopher. While we're on the topic also of storylines, if you're going to read one Magic storyline, one Magic book, Brothers War. That's very, very good.
Brothers War? That's Rasslin and Karaman?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
It's Urza and Mishra. All right. There we have a Baleful Strix.
Woo-woo! That is a 1/1 flying death touch that when it comes into play, draw a card. It is also an artifact.
Yes, and pretty solid card. Only available in the Plane Chase, I believe.
I actually was
that
so
artwork.
excited by Baleful Strix when I saw. I want to say it played at the Invitational in Atlanta last time it was in Atlanta. That I bought 4 immediately.
So you see, I just bought mine recently, actually. So you see a Thoughtseize happening here, and it's Land, Spell Pierce, Jace, Batterskull is what Brian's looking at in Chris's hand. So I think I take the Jace here, yeah, and so does Brian.
Jace is a monster.
Sure is, and that Batterskull's not as frightening without a Stoneforge Mystic to cheat it into play. And it's also not something Brian needs to worry about just yet. So a Ponder from Brian following up that Thoughtseize. And I see, I can't really see. He's got one card is a Flooded Strand. That's the only card I can really tell for sure. Middle card, I'm pretty sure, is the Flooded Strand. He appears to be keeping it, yep. Draws a card. I think that it may have been Dark Confidant off the top. And Baleful Strix into the red zone. Chris Calderon. Team lands in front.
That's right. Go, Chris.
Woo woo! So if you play with lands in front based on the old rules, you also take mana burn. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of it.
That's not how the rules work.
I want somebody to start playing like lands to the left and like creatures to the right, something like that.
Inquisition of Kozilek. That was actually the only time I've ever thought someone's play space was weird.
And so Inquisition resolves, takes the only valid target, and that is Spell Pierce, leaving Chris with just Batterskull and 2 lands. Polluted Delta from Brian, and he cracks it immediately. Chris says I'm going to crack mine immediately as well.
Chris Calderon, wow.
Yeah. Current Rhode Island State champ. Information there from our on-the-scene reporter, Ruben Bressler.
Man on the streets.
That's right. The Newsennings own. The Newsennings only. Right? I mean, there's only one guy on that show, pretty much.
He's a mild-mannered reporter.
Occasionally he has some guests, such as Brian Brown, Colonel Muster.
Baleful Strix, tapped.
You realize when you lean, it doesn't change the glare, Adrian.
Oh, I wasn't trying to change the glare. I was trying to get the angle right.
To change the glare.
No.
Yeah.
Actually, Evan Irwin is working on 3D transmissions. The technology isn't available yet, but he's on it. Dark Confidant from Brian Braun Duin.
So that must have been the card that he kept off that Ponder. Or at least I believe it was. And Strix in for 1.
Chris lays a 4th land. Says go. And Dark Confidant, affectionately called Bob, reveals Creeping Tar Pit.
I really want Creeping Tar Pit back in Standard. It's one card that I really would like to be playing with again.
You know, I'm actually hoping for enemy color man lands or, creature lands, if you prefer, in Dragon's Gate.
That would be awesome.
That would be
awesome.
Dragon's Maze, not Dragon's Gate. Gate Crash, Dragon's Maze. There we go.
Maze Crash.
Maze Crash, yes.
Brian is brainstorming. He's Brian storming, I think is actually how it works for him. And I believe that was a Deathrite Shaman. Did that look like that to you?
I could not see. I see Wasteland, Brainstorm, Flooded Strand, I think 2 Mystic, Stoneforge Mystics, and I can't make up the rest.
So, finishes resolving his Brian Storm.
And he shifts one of his Stoneforge Mystics to the front. I think he's contemplating dropping it into play. In with Bob, the Dark Confidant. Hey, boss. Lays a Wasteland. Stoneforge Mystic, leaving Wasteland open. It works. He gets to shuffle away those cards he put back.
Yeah, that's one of the other things. Just makes Brainstorm so good. Is all of the shuffle effects in Legacy. You have fetch lands, that's the most common, but you also have cards like Stoneforge Mystic and other tutors that can really make use of Brainstorm, where you draw 3 cards and then put a couple of bad ones back, shuffle them away, and get a fresh top of the library. Enlightened Tutor is a card you see doing that as well in decks like Miracles, where you get to shuffle and, well, you have to choose the top card of your library, but
Braun Duin uses the Wasteland after the resolution of the Stoneforge Mystic. He sees himself as being ahead on the board, and he just wants to suppress Chris's access to mana. Even though Chris has more lands in hand, and I believe he knows that, he just wants to keep Chris down a little bit. Dark Confidant says,
another land. He is being very good to Brian. draws I think in fact they may have been the exact 2 cards he put back with Brainstorm. I think he put back Deathrite and land, if not Flooded Strand itself. Didn't get a great look, but he just drew Flooded Strand, land. I'm sorry, Flooded Strand, Deathrite Shaman, I'm pretty sure. He's going to play Creeping Tar Pit, which of course comes into play tapped, and he plays Deathrite Shaman off of the swamp. I believe that is still on the stack at the moment. Yep, resolves. Brian passes, 2 mana up, representing the use of that Stoneforge Mystic. There you see a Marsh Flats from Chris. Chris's hand is Brainstorm, and 2 more cards I can't quite see. Here's an end of turn activation of the Stoneforge Mystic, and Batterskull very likely to hit the board momentarily. There's a Brainstorm in response. So Chris draws 3. Finds another Brainstorm, I believe 2 more lands, and he's quickly decided to put 2 lands back. His hand, I think, is Vendilion Click, and Vendilion Click on the stack here. And this is one of the cooler interactions, where you have a Vendilion Click and respond to a Stoneforge Mystic activation to take away the Batterskull. And Brian, off the top, finds another Stoneforge Mystic, but does lose his Batterskull in the process. So nice little bit of disruption there from Chris, and you can see the power of a card like Vendilion Click when used at the right time. Dark Confidant gonna take a big chunk out of Brian's life total, but also gives him a Jace, the Mind Sculptor. So not all bad. I think that was a 2nd Deathrite Shaman off the top. And Brian wishes they were in the other order. Oh, it may have been Inquisition that looked kind of like a Deathrite Shaman. They have a similar look to them in the artwork.
Inquisition to check Chris Calderon's hand.
And we know Chris has Brainstorm. So Chris is going to fetch. And I think he's just going to Brainstorm in response here. Potentially kind of protect. Or I think he wants to get a fresh few top of the cards. Or top of the library. Yeah, it's Batterskull Brainstorm is his hand. So he's going to Brainstorm here. He's going to draw 3, and he's going to put back cards that he wants to protect from that Inquisition. Not quite sure what they were, but he can keep the Batterskull in hand unless he wants it to. Or he can just keep 2 lands and have the Inquisition miss.
Here's the funny thing with that. Chris knows there's a Jace in Brian's hand.
Yeah.
So, what will we see happen next? Is it going to be Umezawa's Jite put into play? Does he have one? No, is it just a Mystic, Brainstorm, Jace, okay, getting the Mystic to fetch up the lost equipment from the Vendilion Click from earlier.
Batterskull's right there at the bottom. It was clicked down.
He goes with Jite though. A lot of 1 toughness over there.
He knows Chris's hand. He knows he can resolve Jite here if he wants to. Another great use of Vendilion Click is just to check to see if they have a way to counter your important spell. Just like Brian kind of just used Inquisition that way.
What did Chris Calderon protect? He lays one of the Tundra that we already know about.
Not sure what the top of the library was. Oh, it was another equipment.
Oh, what is that?
Sword of Fire and Ice.
Ouch. That's a good one.
Now see, Chris's equipment actually has to resolve. Brian is able to just plop his Jite down using the unsummoning sick Stoneforge Mystic. So Brian does have that advantage as well. He is going to do something different though. He does not want that equipment on the table. He does not, even more, does not want that equipment on one of those creatures.
Does not look like he'll be able to stop it though.
So Brainstorm finds Batterskull. I didn't see what else, but Batterskull was definitely
I believe I saw Batterskull and then a single mana discard spell. I think he took a Flooded Strand and something else and is putting it back. Flooded Strand and a Thoughtseize? Thoughtseize and Jace? I can't tell. That Flooded Strand is covering up the final card.
Covering up whatever that card is. He has Batterskull, Umezawa's Jite, Flooded Strand, and Mystery card in his hand.
Sword of Fire and Ice resolves. Equips on the Vendilion Click. Any responses? No. In come the Flyers.
Now this is trouble
Ouch.
for Brian. So 6 damage in the skies. No blockers on Brian's side of the board. He's got 1 mana up. So he, I guess technically if you count the Deathrite Shaman, he has 2 mana. If he has, yeah, he does have land. So he could Deathrite Shaman for an additional mana.
And now Chris has to decide. The Sword of Fire and Ice has connected. Where will he deal 2 damage? He decides to go with... He's doing some counting here. But 2 damage can go to anything. It can go to Brian Braunduin's head.
Yeah.
It can go to one of Brian's creatures. And it looks like he decides to go to the head. The other element, the blue element of Sword of Fire and Ice, is draw a card, and he does that. Brian Braun-Duin then fetches with his Polluted Delta. Getting a land, he'll be able to use the Deathrite Shaman to get a 2nd mana, and I believe we're going to see a Batterskull come into play.
Yeah, Batterskull or Umezawa's Jite, he can go with either one. As you mentioned, originally he searched up the Jite because there were a lot of 1 toughness guys on the other side. Now, just the Baleful Strix, because the Vendilion Click is holding a sword that's beefing up its toughness. So it is a 5/3. Although I still wouldn't count Jite out of the equation here.
And let's see which equipment ends up coming down.
Scary thing for Brian, he is at just 2 life, so Batterskull probably the better option, but yeah, he goes with Batterskull.
And Dark Confidant out there could be saying, "Get to work, Brian." Uh-oh. Let's see.
It's just going to be scary. And that, I think, is the reason why Chris decided not to destroy the Dark Confidant, because Brian is already so low that Dark Confidant could kill him here on his upkeep.
Brian is considering using Deathrite Shaman during his upkeep.
And, whew, that
Dark
was a tense
Confidant, 0 damage. Now he can get 4 life gain from the Batterskull, and if he puts in a Umezawa's Jite onto it, have 8 life gain, virtually speaking. A tense little dance here.
Another reason why it made sense to go with the Batterskull there over the Jite is that the Batterskull has pseudo haste there by doing that. You vial it in, and now it's not summoning sick anymore. Whereas if he had gone with the Jite there, and went with the Batterskull this turn. Even if he had vialed it in, it still has Summoning Sickness, so, or the Germ would still have Summoning Sickness. So definitely makes more sense to go with Batterskull at the end of turn. I kind of didn't realize how low Brian's life total was. I hadn't looked up in a while. Forgot about that giant hit from the Jace off the top.
Yeah, that was 4 damage. And then the attack that turn after that was for 6 + 2 for 8 damage.
And that's where all his life went. So
Germ
is going to
cast.
Yeah, he cast the Jite and he equipped the Batterskull immediately, or equips the Germ immediately with the Jite.
Everybody attacks.
Yeah, and that is why he went with the cast Jite, because that's 1 more damage from Stoneforge Mystic that otherwise would not have been attacking had it been vialed in.
That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 damage. Knocks Chris down to 7. He has Deathrite Shaman to gain 2. He just gained 4 from Batterskull, putting him back up to 6, and he can gain 4 at will. In order for that Deathrite Shaman to gain life, though, there has to be a creature in a yard. Are there, like, Deathrite Shamans or anything like that in the graveyard?
That's a good question.
I can't tell because of the glare.
Right. In Brian's graveyard, I don't see any creatures.
I think I agree.
Chris's graveyard, it's a lot tougher to tell.
Yeah. I've definitely been noticing a lot more glare on that side of the table, generally speaking. And we see a attack here. This is going to be for... We get -1, so this... There we go. Yeah. The Baleful Strix's dead. Now the Deathrite Shaman can eat it. It's going to be a hit there, though, for 5 damage in the air, and then 2 bonus damage that gets to go anywhere. We see Braun Duin immediately eat the Strix to go up to 8 life, so that the hit from a Vendilion Click plus the Sword of Fire and Ice, if it's directed at his face, will drop him to 1.
Although a virtual 3, because he doesn't have 1 Jite counter left. And that appears to be what's happening here. He draws his card. Brian drops to 2 and then 1. Drops to 3 and then 1. Sorry. Chris
got a Brainstorm, some other cards as well. Land, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Batterskull Hardcast for Chris.
And equip it with Sword of Fire and Ice. This protects that Germ from a Jace.
Maybe we can actually get a token on there instead of a die, but we'll see. May not matter for very long.
Braun Duin decides he does not want to risk it. He kills his own Bob with the Umezawa's Jite token.
Nice play by Brian. And it turns out it would have likely killed him. I couldn't see, but it looked like a spell. Oh, if it was any spell that had a cast, may have been another Bob. Anyway, if it was any spell that has a casting cost of, well, at least of 3, he would have been dead.
For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Adrian Sullivan here with Joey Pasco. This is the first game of this Esper v Esper match. You can see Braun Duin with that Jace, so the Chris Calderon's play of equipping Sword of Fire and Ice has neatly protected that Germ and keeps him, I believe, still alive this turn.
Swords to Plowshares off the top.
Oh, is there
Brian
swords?
Is going to end the game. There is a swords in the top 3. He just brainstormed. He is likely not putting swords back.
Chris Calderon with no misdirections in his list to save the day.
So we're going to see what happens here. There's a land tapped, and there's a Swords to Plowshares on your Germ.
Well, that is going to gain Chris Calderon 6 life.
It is. But he's still in a rough shape here, I think.
For 6 damage. There goes the 6 life. Chris Calderon back to 7. Jace might just bounce that Vendilion Click to make it sick. Umezawa's Jite obviously is there, so never mind. Umezawa's Jite takes care of the Vendilion Click. And Braun Duin might have pulled this game back.
Wow, some amazing play there. Well, just basically seeing the options that you have as far as how you can use those GT counters. And I think Chris is just flooded. And I mean, now I see he has like 3 spells in his hand, but
he's have to put 2 cards
yeah,
back.
he can put 2 lands back. His hand
Swords, Mystic, Snapcaster.
Looks like it could be exactly that. I'm not sure about the Mystic and Snapcaster as much. I'm more sure about the Snapcaster than the Mystic, but I think you're right. I think it's just Swords, Mystic, Snapcaster. He does have 2 fetch lands as well, and he puts those back. So you're right, it was Swords, Mystic, Snapcaster.
And there it is, Stoneforge Mystic, going forth to fetch an Umezawa's Jite perhaps, but I think it's already gone. His looking at his list, the cards he has are Sword of Fire and Ice and Batterskull. Those are the only main deck equipment. His sideboard has Umezawa's Jite,
yeah, he's not
but his main
find
deck
that.
does not. He's got both of his equipment in play already. And he leaves
So
open the mana for Swords, Mystic Swords.
And he gives a shuffle effect, essentially, out of that Stoneforge Mystic. So he brainstormed and then had a shuffle effect.
Deathrite Shaman could nix any fun plans.
Brian cracks a Flooded Strand, fetches and shuffles. Now it looks like a Swords to Plowshares from Chris is imminent. He doesn't want Brian to gain a ton of life, but at the same time, he does not want that germ to hit him again.
Yeah, that makes more counters for the Umezawa's Jite.
Yeah, so basically it's like he's going to gain that life anyway just from the lifelink. So, yeah, I think he just got a Swords the Germ.
Yeah, I'm with you. He goes with the Deathrite Shaman. And Brian Braun Duin is like, do I get to connect here?
Yeah, can I untap?
Oh, that's actually pardon me.
That was all end of
turn.
Chris's turn, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is fine then, because Brian Braun Duin gets to untap, and Chris can do this later. The Deathrite Shaman out of the way means that he can Snapcaster with impunity, as long as the Snapcaster resolves. Jace might have something to say about that. Get out of here,
Jace
Stoneforge.
Bounces the Stoneforge Mystic, and I think
Umezawa's Jite moves.
Yeah.
Very clever of Brian Braun Duin. All of the eggy eggs not in one basket.
So if Brian attacks here, Chris flashes in Snapcaster, even if it resolves. If it resolves, Jeet can take out the Snapcaster, but the Snapcaster will likely flash back Swords to Plowshares on likely the Germ. I'm just trying to figure out, there's some different scenarios here. Creeping Tar Pit becomes a man or a creature and is in on the attack. So here comes Snapcaster, representing a potential blocker if the Jite counter doesn't deal with it. He gives Swords to Plowshares flashback and casts it on the Germ, which resolves, giving Brian a bunch of life. And I think Brian says, yeah, I saw that, and this is all still going to kill you.
Yep. And the Umezawa's Jite token is removed to kill the Snapcaster, and
yeah.
that was a pretty epic 25-minute game one.
It was. That was a long one. So these guys, not any strangers really to these longer games, I'm sure, with the decks they're playing.
One of the key moments of the game, Chris Calderon, he goes for the throat, tries to get the kill in there, puts a Sword of Fire and Ice on his own Vendilion, on his Vendilion click, and then deals the damage directly to Brian Braun Duin's head, and puts Brian in a position where Brian is on the edge of defeat for several turns, but Brian pulls it back around in a series of, I think, really exciting moves. But like that aggressive move by Chris Calderon, he could have used the Sword of Fire and Ice to kill, let's say, a Dark Confidant from Brian Braun Duin, but it really pushed Brian into a corner.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a really exciting series of plays. Probably back at maybe about 10, 12 minutes ago. So.
Yes, you'll have to re-watch that when we do the replays later on. A couple of cards in his sideboard, in Chris's sideboard, that I wanted to point out. One, I just love to see this. It's not completely uncommon, but one copy of Reanimate, just to get these Reanimator strategies, the Tin Fins. They dump somebody in the graveyard, you know, one of their big guys, and then give you an opportunity to cast Reanimate, taking their guy.
That's one of my favorite Burning Wish targets for those decks that run Burning Wish. The one of Reanimate, just to steal it, yoink it away.
Yeah, very cool. Not coming in this match, but I like pointing it out. Two other, or just one other card, 2 copies of it though. Restoration Angel in Legacy.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
It's a 3/4 body. Lightning Bolt does not kill our Resto.
Yeah, it does seem very very good against those rug decks that are attacking with a lot of 3-power guys. You got Nimble Mongoose, you've got Delver of Secrets, and you've got, again, Lightning Bolt, as you mentioned. So it's out of range of all of those. It's going to require either 2 spells or a block and a bolt or something like that. So very nice there. But
it can't be Inquisitioned. It can't be spell snared.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool card. If you didn't know already, Restoration Angel is a good card. But seeing it break into Legacy is very cool too.
I think we're going to see Braun Duin bringing in control spells. Snapcaster Mage from the board, Vendilion Click from the board. I think Disenchant for the equipment that he's facing.
Yeah, same from
Counterspell, Thoughtseize, and then potentially one Supreme Verdict, potentially Vindicate. But that is a lot of cards. That's probably too many cards for what he would want to do. So that's the full access. I actually am very curious. Brian, I think, has probably played Esper Blade a lot. I know I have picked up Esper Blade probably about a dozen times in the last year. It's not my favorite Legacy deck to play or play against, so some of that is conjecture on my part. Christopher Calderon, I think we're going to see Umezawa's Jite come in to fight Jites. Engineered Explosives, I expect to see definitely come in. Disenchant, I also expect.
Yeah, again, he's got Supreme Verdict as well if he decides that that's something potentially he could bring in. He's also got an additional Force of Will. I don't really think he brings that in here, though, more against the combo decks. He's got some Flusterstorms, and that kind of goes same thing, but if he feels like he needs a Force Spike kind of effect, Flusterstorm could do well for him. But,
Force of Will is a very strange card in these matchups. You don't want to cast Force of Will because the attrition really hurts.
Right.
At the same time, mana, you are bound by mana, and there are often moments where a Force of Will can stop a key play. Usually the thing I've seen happen in these matchups is that the decks that have access to Force of Will, if they don't have a very aggressive discard package, will keep 1 or 2 Force of Wills in there just to have in the mix in the deck, but not having 4 Force of Wills because it's just too much pain to your to the question of card advantage.
Yeah, Chris main decks 3 and sideboards 1, so you could potentially see him going with your plan and maybe siding 1 out, but keeping 2 still in. If you're just joining us, I'm Joey Pasco, joined in the booth by Adrian Sullivan, coming to you guys live from Washington, D.C., where we are in round 4 of the StarCityGames.com Legacy Open, and Ryan Brown's win up a game with his, well, it's Esper Blade with Deathrite Shaman. If we can think of a better thing to call it than 4-color blade, we will, although we might not change it on screen. Chris's more classic Esper Blade, although a couple of little wrinkles. He's got Baleful Strix in there. You don't see that all the time in Esper Blade.
It's a cool one.
Deathrite Shaman from Brian Brown's and a Ponder on his second turn here.
Three Moon Ponder. See, that Stoneforge Mystic looks like plenty of land, and the Ponder, Brian holding his hand at the exact right angle to make it very difficult.
A lot of players are very good at that. You know, just perfectly perpendicular to the lens.
Thoughtseize is the card he retrieved. I think I see Brainstorm, Thoughtseize, Stoneforge Mystic. And Chris Calderon lays Tundra, which means to
That
me
was
that there's sorry, Brian Braun lays a Tundra, which says to me he has another card on top he wants to keep.
And a Swords to Plowshares at end of turn from Chris will deal with that Deathrite Shaman before it gets out of hand. Marsh Flats from Chris, immediately cracked. And an Inquisition from Kozilek on the stack. Brian has a Brainstorm that he is going to respond with. And Chris has Mana Leak. That's another one you don't see a whole lot in Legacy, but it works. And Brian now loses his Stoneforge Mystic to Inquisition of Kozilek, as we see Inquisition, Thoughtseize, and a couple of lands. Brian top decks Jace and casts a Thoughtseize of his own, sees Sword of Fire and Ice, Brainstorm, and Snapcaster Mage.
It's an interesting call. Long game, that Sword of Fire and Ice is the most deadly, but Snapcaster provides the most immediate advantage, and Brainstorm, obviously, just such a pillar of the format. Any one of those cards is reasonable to take.
Absolutely.
Goes with the Snapcaster. Brian Braun fetches. Mana Leak is a very important card for some of these decks because you see the basics there. You can't necessarily rely on the actual spell Counterspell because of Wasteland.
Yeah, Patrick Chapin and I got in this discussion back in Denver at the SCG Open Series in Denver back in 2011, where we were talking about the pitfalls of using a card like Mana Leak versus Counterspell or Counterspell versus Mana Leak. It's one of those same things where you can have your choice of Counterspell or Mana Leak. Most people want to go with Counterspell, but sometimes you just can't cast a Counterspell.
Main phase Brainstorm. We see a Thoughtseize in there. We see a Swords to Plowshares. 2 cards go back. Swords, Deathrite Shaman. Passes.
Top decks a second copy of Jace the Mind Sculptor, immediately going to crack his Flooded Strand. And Brian's going to cast a Jace the Mind Sculptor. Now, whether he's going to resolve it, that is the question.
Spell Pierce or no, Chris Calderon.
Force of Will would work.
True, but we know his hand is Thoughtseize and something.
In that case, Force of Will would likely not work.
Jace.
Jace
it works apparently.
And Brainstorms finds Jite, Wasteland, Brainstorm.
Right here, Chris needs to top deck something basically immediately. One of the problems with facing down Jace in Legacy, it ends games. Chris Calderon draws. What is that? Umezawa's Jite?
Yes, that is a promo copy of Jite. That is the Grand Prix Jite, I believe.
Now he has a Restoration Angel, I believe, in hand, and Thoughtseize.
Wasteland on the Underground Sea from Brian.
And Brian is just going to bury Chris in cards.
There's a Stoneforge Mystic. Chris, now choked on mana, has Thoughtseize Restoration Angel. So he did bring those in here. I can't fault him necessarily for it. It's just not the matchup I thought it was for.
Well, I mean, it does...
Still does stuff. It's a 3/4 body, as
yep.
you mentioned.
And it can kill a Jace.
Yeah.
It can jump in the way and kill a creature that wasn't expecting it.
It's certainly a versatile card. There's a Batterskull now in Brian's hand after being tutored up by a Stoneforge Mystic. Brian passes his turn. Chris untaps his 2 lands. Draws, I believe that was Sword of Fire.
Yep,
nice.
It was.
And Chris is probably pretty frustrated. He keeps drawing his tutor targets.
And now Brian starts pumping +1. Put that to the bottom, Chris.
Yeah. Chris, nothing to do on his turn, passes it back to Brian, who Fate Seals immediately and puts Chris's top card on the bottom. Brian passes back. Chris draws, finds a Tundra, and is still, he's lacking any black mana, so he has access to Thoughtseize.
Stoneforge Mystic activated. There's a Bear Skull in play. Untap.
Yeah, he has Thoughtseize in hand, but does not have black mana, so. On Brian's side now has Jace, who is brainstorming for him, alongside a Germ token holding a Batter Skull and a Stoneforge Mystic. So, a couple of win conditions on the table for Brian.
Gets to put back 2 bad ones, and then lays a Flooded Strand. In for 5.
Chris now draws his card for the turn, plays Sword of Fire and Ice, and that is sort of underwhelming without a guy.
And we're gonna see a hand check. Vendilion Click, what you got? Show me. Thoughtseize, Restoration Angel.
Angel no longer a surprise for Brian. He can decide to let him keep it or just play around it. Or let him keep it and just play around it, or he can get rid of it with the click. I think he says bottom the Angel. So.
Fetches with his Flooded Strand. All of this at the end of turn.
Getting a fresh set of cards on top. He's going to be able to smash in for 8 here, knocking Chris to 6. So a 2-turn clock for Chris.
Untap.
1 mystery card in Chris's hand. Brian doesn't know, and neither do we. So he's going to go ahead and brainstorm. Creeping Tar Pit, Polluted Delta, and Swords to Plowshares. He just put back the 2 lands, I think. Tar Pit and Polluted Delta.
And in for a little bit more this time, in for 8.
Knocks Chris to 6, and he's got to play. Looks like Dark Confidant, so Chris needs to find an answer very quickly, facing down all those guys. He does have a Stoneforge Mystic, which is it's like a really kind of speed bump situation. What we know is that Brian has a Swords to Plowshares in hand to clear any blockers that might present a problem. But yeah, Chris realizes he's not going to be able to even put up much of a speed bump with that Mystic. And Brian Brown Duin takes the match with 12 minutes left, 2-0 over Chris Calderon, reigning Rhode Island state champ. But Chris puts up a fight as much as possible. Brian just had the edge there.
A quick 2-0 victory.
Well, I wouldn't call it quick.
Well, fair enough. A 38-minute 2-0 victory for Brian Braun Duin.